Hi everybody, I'm Andrea and today I'll be doing my February wrap-up / current reads because I feel that I start a lot of titles at the end of February and they kind of bled into March, so I'm just gonna put them all together in this video and see where it goes. And because it was Black History Month in the States, I did try to pick some own voices books to read and hopefully learn a lot from them, and I did, so I'm happy about that. And yeah, let's get started. So the first book I picked up was The Fire This Time, A New Generation Speaks About Race by edited by Jesmyn Ward. So Jesmyn Ward was really inspired by James Baldwin and Trayvon Martin to curate a collection of short stories featuring new voices to talk about race. This book was named after the 1963 James Baldwin book, The Fire Next Time, which was first published in The New Yorker. The stories in this book deal with racism, colorism, and ignorance, and so much more. Each story is incredibly relevant and gripping in its own way. One of my favorite stories in this book is about a grad student who goes to do a research project on an unmarked slave graveyard that has been paved over by a supermarket. It's about a town that willingly ignores their past and refuses to acknowledge the pain it was built on. I think this book brings an excellent discussion about shared generational trauma and how it affects people down the way. And it's a really great example of an own voices book and why it's so important to read and why it's so important to have. Yeah. Another book I read was Between the World and Me by Ta-Nehisi Coates. This is a very, very powerful piece. It's framed as a letter from Ta-Nehisi to his teenage son. And side note, Ta-Nehisi works for The Atlantic and he writes for The Atlantic, but he also writes for the Black Panther comic books, which I thought was really, really cool. This book is part memoir and part advice to his young son about what it's like to be Black in the US and what that reality is and what kind of emotions you go through and what he experienced and what he hopes his son will experience or will not experience as well. It's a very insightful book and it's a short read, and it doesn't shy away from the raw emotions a person can go through, and it deals with topics like microaggressions and police brutality. One of Ta-Nehisi's friends was killed in a police brutality incident, and he really talks about that as well. The next book I'm going to talk about, I read in a blur. I kind of read it the last day of February and it bled into March, and I binged it and I really enjoyed it. That was Americana by Chimamanda Adichie. So this is a woman from Lagos, Nigeria, Efemelu, who leaves Lagos to go study in the US, and she leaves her boyfriend and her family and her friends behind and moves to the US, and it's kind of about the culture shock and racism that she experiences once she moves to the States. So she's been in the US for 15 years and she's getting ready to move back to Lagos and start her life over back home. This book explores multiple points of view, so you get to see not only the world from her perspective, but also from the perspective of her boyfriend back home in Lagos as well, and you get to see what he's been up to. So you have a really clear understanding of what the entire scope of her world looks like. This is such a rich, dense book, and the world building is so intricate, but I really admire the writer because I didn't really get lost or confused. Everything was very clear to me as a reader and I knew exactly what was happening. Partially, I think this is just because the author is an amazing writer, but also because the characterization of each protagonist in the book was so well written and so well thought out. The main character was always unapologetically herself, and she was in charge of her own choices. Something that I noticed throughout the book was that every twist, every turn, every decision was made very consciously and very deliberately, even if those decisions led to bad things or traumatic events. The main character always felt like she was in control of what she was choosing. I didn't exactly agree with the overarching love story in this book, but I really enjoy it as a story about immigration or a social commentary about immigration and about Pan-Africanism. So I think it's very poignant and real in that way. The next book I partially read, and I'm looking down because it's a long title, is Slave Narratives, A Folk History of Slavery in the United States from Interviews with Former Slaves, and this is a Texas Narratives Part 1. I started reading this book because I found it on Amazon, and it's public domain. It's free for anybody to look at and download. But this book is exactly what the title implies. It's a collection of interviews done by the Works Project Administration, which was a program that came as a result of the New Deal, which employed millions of unemployed people in the US during that time, and this came as a result of this. So this is a collection of interviews with former slaves, and what they did is they got over 2,300 stories, individual stories, and over 500 pictures, and they put it together into volumes, and they're all divided by state and by parts. So this is part 1, Texas, but there's like 5 parts, I think, to Texas. And I just picked Texas because it was the first one I saw, but it goes through every slave state and it goes through all the different stories. These stories were recorded between 1936 and 1938. And I'm gonna be honest, I'm going through this book at like a snail pace. I don't know, since they're all different stories and all real stories and individual ones, each story is their own world, and I really want to give the most time possible to each story. Plus, the vernacular in these stories is super different from what I'm used to. It's definitely vernacular from the South. I'm not familiar with that, and it's like antiquated by now, you know? There's a lot of slang terms that I don't necessarily understand that I have to Google and stuff. So there's that aspect of it as well. But right now I'm reading one about a 93-year-old man called William Adams, and William Adams was a former slave, and his life goal was to be the master of the supernatural. And I think that is so cool, and his story is so interesting. So I'm really excited to slowly make my way through this one. The next book I read was Illuminate. I adored this book so much. I really loved it, and I feel like doing a full video review on this series once the last one comes out. But oh my god, it's like all my favorite things in sci-fi into one book. The year is 2575, and there's a deadly virus outbreak. There is teenage romance. There is a rogue AI named Aiden. There is shady figurehead politicians, and there's this really badass teenage female main character at the center of all this. And then all of that takes place in spaceships, and I know this kind of seems like a lot, but I think the way this book is formatted really helps the reader digest this and make it seem really organic and very natural. The format is super unique, and I don't have the actual physical copy with me because I had to give it back to the library, but I have the sequel. Spoiler alert, I also read the sequel. But it looks like this. So it's like, it looks like instant messages or classified documents or pages like this, which I think is super cool. I think this format really helped me as a reader understand what was even going on. But at first, I have to admit, that format threw me off. It took me like 45 pages to actually get used to this kind of web talking format they had going on, like it's IM messaging thing. But it took a while. At first, it was really easy to get distracted from this format, but once the story picked up and once I got used to it, there was no going back. I binged that book. Besides that, this format is really great at building suspense and tension. Each page just felt like a sonic boom. Besides this, there are so many callbacks and so many fun little parallels to films like 2001: Space Odyssey.
I'm sorry, Dave. I'm afraid I can't do that.
Or Alien.
Cargo and ship destroyed. I should reach the frontier in about 6 weeks.
And there's so many Easter eggs as well for people that are fans of sci-fi, film, and book. I read Gemina. This book takes place about 5 minutes after Illuminate, with an entirely new set of characters from a different point of view, which I'm not gonna lie, since I binged it so close together, I was a little bit disappointed because I couldn't see what happened immediately to the characters I cared about, but they did show up later on. There are some added twists, however, to this sequel. There are wormholes, alternate dimensions, deadly alien life forms, and a killer death squad, and imminent death. So the stakes are raised even higher in the sequel. The format in this book is the same as Illuminate, but it does have some drawings by Marie Lu, which you can see at the start like this, because our main character in this book is a drawer. Another book I read was Meddling Kids by Edgar Cantero, and this book was kind of advertised as a subversion of the teen archetypes that were seen in books like Nancy Drew and Hardy Boys and in shows like Scooby-Doo. So this book is basically as if you took the Scooby-Doo gang, for example, and you aged them up till they were college age, and then it's them dealing with their inner demons that they got from when they were kids, basically. I'm not gonna lie, I enjoyed the first 2/3 of this book a lot. I really was enjoying it. But then the last third of this book kind of fell flat to me, and so it kind of soured it a little bit for me. What I did like about this book though was its characters. We have a really great badass leader, and she's queer and she's Latina and she's brown and proud, and I loved that about her. Her name is Andy, and I really enjoyed her character. I think with a couple more revisions this book would be amazing, but yeah, I liked it. I enjoyed it. I just wish it had a little bit more. Yeah. Another book I read was World War Z by Max Brooks, and I read this book on a 2-hour Amtrak ride back home, and it was very dark and very bumpy, so it helped set the ambience. For a second there, I thought I was in Train to Busan. If you guys have seen that movie, and if you haven't and you like zombies, you totally should. It's Korean. It's great. It's on Netflix. This is a story written as a series of journalistic vignettes about the zombie apocalypse, and they're just a collection of shorts about different people and how they each dealt with their new reality of the zombie virus. I really loved this book, and I binged it all because I'm a fan of narrative nonfiction shorts. It was really cool to see that same format being translated into something that was completely fictionalized, and I really like how this book took the zombie genre and made it different. And I know that sounds kind of weird to say, since I feel like that's a genre that's been beaten to death, puns, because it's everywhere, you know, from The Walking Dead to Fear the Walking Dead to iZombie. But I really thought it gave a new, fresh perspective on it, and I enjoyed it a lot, and now I see why people say the movie sucked. Those are the books I read in February and part of March, and thank you for watching, and I'll see you next time. Bye.